My name's Rosemary Cresswell and I'm the current chair of the Society for the Social History of Medicine. I'm delighted to celebrate our 50th anniversary with you, and we've been talking to our past presidents and other people with a long association with the Society to find out more about its history.
Well, happy birthday, SSHM. It's an absolute delight and thrill to be here wishing you your half anniversary. Sorry, I should say that. What is half a centenary? I think given where Social History of Medicine Society started all those years ago, I don't think the original architects could have envisaged that it would have been sustained, perhaps for that long, but not only just sustained, but actually flourishing and thriving. It's a very dynamic group and community which has actually had a kind of centrifugal impact on scholarship throughout the world.
My time as chair in the first decade of the 21st century was quite an interesting time. I've always enjoyed the fact that the executive committee is comprised of younger scholars. In fact, I think that's a strength of the society, that it recognizes the creative energy and the intellectual capacity of younger scholars at the start, or maybe at the first couple of years into their careers. That was always an element of the executive committee that I have enjoyed.
I have lots of happy memories of my time on the EC. I was on it for 10 years, and the people are what have always made SSHM for me. I think academia can be a pretty lonely environment to work in. When you undertake research, it's always quite a solitary activity. The opportunity to network and to feel part of a community is incredibly important. My membership brought me into a community, which made a massive difference to me. Perhaps my intellectual development, but much more so the social side, just feeling part of something with a group of fantastic people. Those on the EC were brilliant to work with and have become, you know, some of the leaders in the field. But the conferences are always the friendliest that I go to, always very inclusive and welcoming and fun. And it's been brilliant to be able to touch base with colleagues and friends over the years, at least once every 2 years, but hopefully more than that with the specialist things that SSHM does.
We spoke to key members of the Society across the 5 decades of its existence to find out some of their highlights of working with the Society.
My first role was as treasurer from 1977 to 79, but from then on the executive and on the editorial board and so forth, I was involved in the more publication side of what the Society did, as series editor for the series of volumes that they've produced ever since then. And also I was editor of the Bulletin as it kind of matured into something which could then move up to being a journal. So the last bulletins were under my editorship, and then I was part of the group that was turning the Bulletin into a journal, which is basically endless haggling about publishers and money and that sort of thing. I was working on the history of public health at that time, and the first years of the Society were very much around public health. There were quite a lot of people from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, for instance, and they were, by and large, people who were very disillusioned, if not actually more than that. They felt they had a grievance because they belonged to the public health professions, who were very much undermined by the local government reorganisation in 1974. A lot of them lost their jobs or they had to reapply for them. So they were motivated to tell their story, and they were motivated also to come together and tell each other their stories. So a lot of them were like that, but the other contingent was from the Wellcome Institute, particularly the librarians, people like Robin Price and Gordon Wilson. They did a lot of the office bearing to begin with. After that, it changed, and I think it went slightly into the doldrums. And at that point, that was when Charles Webster became prominent. But that's not to underestimate some of the big names that were involved in it at the outset, people like Asa Briggs and George Rosen and so forth. Some people, I think, felt that Oxford was dominant. If you look at what was actually happening in the first years of the Society anyway, and up until the late 80s when I was still involved, the focus is also very much on London. An awful, the lecture series, for instance, were virtually always held in London. Conferences were held in London. In fact, the Oxford unit did not benefit from the attributes that are usually ascribed to Oxford as an institution, apart from the massive library resources and that sort of thing. We led a precarious existence. It was difficult. My very first paper as a postgraduate was given to a meeting of the Society in North Oxford in a motel, I think it was. And that was in 1975. We all gave papers much later in our careers then than we do now. So I would have probably gone to meetings before that, but that would be my starting point. But by then I was working with Charles Webster in the Wellcome unit in Banbury Road, so he would have already been involved at that point. What I always liked about the Society was that it was, its early years were a bit stuffy. The membership was much older for a start. But as, the younger people came in, it became a very pleasant environment, very informal, lots of discussion, argument if you like, about proper issues, There were postgraduate conferences from quite an early stage. And we went all over the country.
Now, my association with the Society of Social History of Medicine goes back to 1981, when I was very privileged to go to Oxford University to start to do a doctorate, and was supervised by Charles Webster. So my intellectual home in Oxford was the Wellcome unit, and I spent a lot of time there with Charles Webster, got to know Maggie Pelling and obviously Irvin Loudon and Jean Loudon, and it was a wonderful environment. And they were the ones, of course, who said to me, oh, you must go to the EAHMH conferences. Ever since I arrived in Oxford in 1981, Charles Webster would say occasionally, something about, oh, we really do need a journal in this field, a proper journal, an academic journal. So I was quite had that in my mind. I was fortunate enough to be awarded a junior research fellowship at Queen's College, Oxford in 1984, which meant I dined at high table, and on a Wednesday night they had guest night. And on this one night, I think it was around about 1986, I was sitting next to this person who introduced himself as the person in charge of journals at Oxford University Press. And I was sort of thinking about what Charles had always said to me. I casually said to this man, I said, we've always talked about wanting or needing an academic journal in our discipline. And so he asked what that was. And he said, well, we are actually at this very point in time wanting to increase our journal offerings. And I said, oh, okay. And he was definitely interested. I couldn't wait. The next morning, I was on the phone as secretary, as I was at the time, to Virginia, as soon as I got up. And Virginia said, yeah, go for it. Find out more about it. That sounds really good. I was sort of left having to do some of the work, like, researching the journal and, looking at maybe the prospective editorial board and this kind of thing. So I was left kind of doing a lot of the groundwork leading up to the setting up of the journal. And Richard Smith came on. He and I were the first editors. Having a serious kind of peer-reviewed academic journal, really the bulletin was great, useful source of information. They published conference papers, abstracts, but it wasn't, the kind of peer-reviewed academic journal that goes with a serious academic discipline. And so I think it was an opportunity for scholarship. And, you know, I'm sure you'll agree that the journal has gone from strength to strength as far as being a leader in the field of the history, social and cultural history of medicine. In 1988, just when we got the first issue out, really, I was offered a job back in Auckland. And so, you know, we obviously thought, oh, what are we going to do about the editorship? And it was just at that point that someone said to me, you know, there is this, you can keep doing it. There's this new thing called email, which people just weren't really, you know, into at that time. And so we just sort of thought about that as a possibility. But in the end, I think it was decided that it was safer to have two people on the spot as editors. And that's when Anne Digby came on board and replaced me as editor. But as kind of almost a consolation prize, and to see where this email thing really did work, I carried on. I was invited to carry on as a kind of an overseas editor.
Yes, well, I began my affiliation or association with SSHM in the early 1990s. I was just completing my DPhil at Oxford under the supervision of Anne Digby, who is well known to the Society, a former editor of the journal, amongst other things. And suggested that I become involved as a student rep on the executive committee, as I think it was around 1992 or so, 1993. I found it absolutely fascinating. It was a wonderful group of scholars who were engaged in exciting research and organizing conferences and edited volumes. And so I continued, and I became the treasurer of the society for several years. And then after that, the chair of the executive committee. So more or less the entire 1990s, I think I was in some capacity involved in the SSHM. And as a young scholar, this was extremely profitable for me academically and professionally. It introduced me to how professional societies are organized. I was very much involved with the financing of the journal, which just happened to be at the Oxford Wellcome unit where I was doing my postdoc. So Paul Weinling was literally in the basement of 47 Banbury Road, organizing social history of medicine. So I got to get a real sense of how journals were being organized and financed and edited, and the challenges associated with that. I was actually involved in renegotiating the journal contract with Oxford University Press, which itself was extremely interesting. This was just before they ended up purchasing or taking over the Journal of the History of Medicine and Allied Sciences. A very sort of organized conference schedule. We usually had a thematic day conference in the spring, a thematic day conference in the fall, and a big annual conference that was sort of undefined in the summer, where everyone could congregate, and we had our annual meeting. And I certainly think that supporting graduate students was something that was very important to the SSHM. We established travel bursaries, for example. At that time, we always impressed upon conference organizers that they should be welcoming and incorporate graduate student papers. Not that people needed that much encouragement, but I think there's always a great sensitivity to the next generation, as it were, coming through, and I think that was part of the success of the society.
So I joined the SSHM as a master's student already, because they were giving out bursaries, and so I got a student bursary as a master's student to attend the Glasgow conference. So I must have been a PhD student, but it must have been in 98 or 99. A big conference in Glasgow, hosted by the Glasgow Wellcome Unit for the History of Medicine. And then I finished my PhD in 99. The first meeting I attended was the last one that David Wright chaired. And I joined the committee first as a co-opted member, and then took on editing the Gazette, the newsletter, in 2000 or 2001. fairly soon afterwards. And I did that until 2004, when Flurin, Condrau, succeeded Stuart as chair, and I then succeeded Flurin as treasurer. And I then stayed as treasurer until I think 2016 or so. I think the last of the annual, or the last of the big regular conferences in the old series I attended was in Glasgow, and I think that must have been in 1999. And then after that, we only did small themed conferences for a few years. Three themed conferences, which were subsidized. And then I, with a colleague in 2003, organized this conference which was meant to be a themed conference, but it ended up being quite big.
We then published a call for papers, as you do, and we got a very big, unexpectedly big response to this call, much bigger than we thought, than we expected. And then we decided we might as well do this meeting as a bigger conference. However, it still maintained the feeling of a small meeting, of a workshop, and this was partly due to the venue. We had a fairly cozy venue, a student hall over in Fallowfield, Allen Hall. What made it successful was partly that everybody who was there gave a paper, from very senior scholars down to early career and even master students, I think, giving presentations. And this kind of close and cozy togetherness has been attracting American scholars to SSHM conferences.
So SSHM has given me an opportunity to interact with other students and other professionals who are interested in the same topics and in the same research field as myself, which has been very helpful, seeing as I don't always get the opportunity to talk to other people who do social history of medicine within my own peer group. So it's been very beneficial for me to be able to get the journal so I can see what new publications are being put out, what other people are working on, as well as interacting on social media and seeing what new opportunities are and what's going on in the world of social history of medicine. The society has been so helpful in helping me attend conferences. I received a bursary to go to EAHMH last year in Birmingham and present my research on medieval epilepsy to a new audience that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten the opportunity to present to, which allowed me to interact with people who had new insights, which helped me a lot in writing and just to get new perspectives that I wouldn't have otherwise seen.
In 2019 to 20, much of the work of the Society has been focused on the issues relating to the journal and the open access agenda. We've been responding to Plan S and UK RI consultations in the last 2 years. Our journal was founded in 1988 and provides around 90% of the SSHM's income, enabling us to provide conference funding, bursaries, a student essay prize and much more through providing our volunteers, the executive committee and the editorial team with the opportunity to meet 2 to 3 times a year to discuss the discipline. It's these volunteers that I'd really like to remember in our 50th anniversary year. We would not have conferences, journal articles, books, funding opportunities, prizes and much more without them. 2020 has been dominated by coronavirus. We'll be hosting a webinar to discuss the epidemic with some of our former EC members, editors and volunteers, getting their thoughts on the value of history for understanding the current pandemic. We've created resources such as an epidemics reading list and a list of contributions by academics to the debate. We've also been busy this year introducing our Black Lives Matter movement statement. We've been responding to the goals that we have in the future and reflecting on what we've done in the past to address equality, diversity and inclusion. And we introduced an officer with responsibility for this type of work a couple of years ago. I joined the EC in 2006 when I was in the final months of my PhD. SSHM is very welcoming to scholars at all stages of their careers, whether in paid employment or not, and our conferences have grown and grown to between 200 and 300 delegates every 2 years. We enjoy a relationship with the European Association for the History of Medicine and Health, sponsoring keynote speakers at each other's conferences, and we're looking forward to continuing our 50th anniversary celebrations in person and online at our conference in Swansea in June 2021. I look forward to seeing you in Swansea, whether online or in person, in June 2021.
Happy 50th birthday to the Society for the Social History of Medicine. You don't look a day over 25, but it's really fantastic to see how much the Society has accomplished in its first 50 years.
Very, very happy birthday.
Very happy birthday to the Society for Social History of Medicine. 50 years. Gosh, where have they gone?
Happy birthday, SSHM.
Happy birthday, SSHM, a grand 50.
Happy birthday, SSHM. 50 years, pretty good going. Delighted that it's happening. Well done.
Happy birthday, SSHM. You've been with me all the way through my journey in the history of medicine, from PhD, finished early this century, through the wilderness years of postdocs, through to a proper grown-up mid-career status.
I still have very fond memories of my time on the executive committee and in the society, and I hope that the next half century is as prosperous as the first half century.
Happy birthday, SSHM!
A very big happy birthday to the Society of the Social History of Medicine, a wonderful society.
Hi, Jonathan Reinarz here. SSHM, I can't believe we are both celebrating our 50th birthdays this year. You're looking great. Shame we couldn't meet up in Swansea this year, but we'll see each other again soon. So all the best, and looking forward to celebrating that 100th birthday together. I don't know where, but it'll be great.
It's been so great to be part of this journey, and what an amazing team. Happy birthday, SSHM.
Happy birthday, SSHM.
Happy birthday, SSHM.
Happy 50th birthday, SSHM.